The whole region knows the drill by now. Dateline Ouagadougou. If you're watching images of pro-junta demonstrators protesting the visit of West African mediators looking for rule of law guarantees from new interlocutors after a coup. No need to reach for the remote control. This is not a rerun. The capital of Burkina Faso just experienced its second coup in 8 months, once again following a rout by an emboldened jihadist insurgency in the north. We'll be asking about the disconnect between officers in the capital and under fire foot soldiers in the field, a disconnect that haunts the entire region. And what about those happy to blame it all on former French colonists whose forces were shown the door in neighboring Mali? Imperialism seems to be in the eye of the beholder these days, with, as we'll see, Russia happy to fet a new strongman, pay no attention to its invasion of Ukraine, which creates more food insecurity for Africa, or its track record of brutality wherever its mercenaries go on the continent. How many in Burkina believe they'll be better off siding with Moscow? What is Paris's response today in the France 24 debate? We're looking at Burkina's repeated coups, and joining us, activist Ali Traoré of the Ballet Citoyen Civic Group. Thank you for being with us.
Glad to be with you today.
Nyagane Bakayoko is chair of the Africa Security Sector Network. Welcome back.
Hello.
Welcome back as well to Emmanuel Ego, director of the Phobos International Consultancy. How are you?
Very fine.
Right.
Thank you very much.
And from Washington, Rita Liamouri, senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South and senior Sahel advisor at the Navanti Group. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Since 2020, in West Africa, you've had coups, Guinea and Chad, and double coups. In Burkina, like in neighboring Mali, jihadist insurgencies sapping the faith in their leaders that are in charge. The latest example with Nicholas Rushworth.
This attack on a supply convoy in the north of Burkina Faso was carried out by Islamist fighters a few days ago. At least 11 Burkina Faso soldiers were killed, dozens of civilians were reported missing. The fight against Islamist terrorism in the country is failing despite years of military support from France. The Islamist terrorist threat is region-wide throughout the Sahel. The number of attacks since 2016 in the border region between Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger has increased. Thousands of people have been killed. Some people in Burkina Faso are critical of France, the former colonial ruler. Burkina Faso's partnership with France is one of the reasons for the country's coup. The new strongman, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, is thinking of looking for support from other countries.
Les Français ont longtemps été nos partenaires. Si on a d'autres partenaires aujourd'hui qui peuvent nous soutenir, ne voyez pas forcément la Russie, mais d'autres puissances. Les Américains sont nos partenaires actuellement. On peut avoir aussi la Russie comme partenaire. D'ailleurs, nous sommes en partenariat avec la Russie. Il s'agit de la renforcer. Donc, on peut avoir plusieurs partenaires avec toutes les puissances qui veulent bien nous aider dans cette lutte, dans ce combat.
That shift has taken place in neighboring Mali. Bamako severed ties with Paris a few months ago to turn to Moscow. There are an increasing number of Wagner paramilitary fighters in the Sahel region. The situation, meanwhile, on the ground in the region continues to deteriorate. More than 2 million people have been displaced by terrorist attacks in Burkina Faso alone since 2015.
Ali Traoré, what was your reaction when you heard there was another coup going on in Ouagadougou on Friday?
It is sad to see another coup in Burkina Faso. Two coups in this year, 2022. It is sad because it is a situation in which we are constating. We can see the poor quality of governance of our leaders in Burkina Faso. It is to a political, I would say, political institutions' weakness are just shown to us, and we have to take, we have to put a reflection on this situation and to change things in Burkina Faso. This is so sad, and we are just ready to take this opportunity to think about our institutions, political institutions, and to create and to adapt them to our device.
It feels as though Colonel Damiba wasn't there long enough to establish credentials. Why was he chased from power?
Damiba, when he arrives in January in Burkina Faso, like the chief, he said he was ready to fight against terrorism in Burkina Faso. But after 6 months, we have we constat on the political and the geographical situation that it is just a fail, a great fail for him and for Burkina Faso. And his decisions wasn't accepted by Burkinabés. It is the reason why when the Captain Traoré Ibrahima make a coup, the youngness has support him to say to Damiba to go away.
Niagare Bakayoko, he's replaced then by this 34-year-old army captain who comes from the field. In the north, just like the coup in January, there's been this gruesome attack by insurgents. What is Ibrahim Traoré going to do in 8 or 9 months? Is it going to be the same again?
What is very important to say, in my view, is that Ibrahim Traoré is, from the beginning, in January 2022, a member of the so-called MPSR, the junta itself, is a member of the junta, which shows that, in fact, there are kind of tensions between the military, inside of the military itself, and that there is a disagreement between those military leaders about the kind of options which have to be used to counter the jihadi insurgency. What we have seen is, in fact, that the first coup in January has the same immediate causes, which is a major attack in Yatta in the case of January, and Gatsinde in the case of this last coup, which have been showing that there were big problems in the chain of command, in particular as regards the supply in terms of logistic, fuel, etc.
And so this fratricide battle within the special forces, I believe, right, inside of the of Burkina's military, is it a battle of egos, or are there two different ways of approaching the fight against the insurgency?
It's not within the special forces themselves. It is apparently between some members of the special forces and other units, which are called Cobra, which seems to have been fighting all over the weekend. I don't know what exactly will be the option which will be promoted on the ground by Ibrahim Traoré, but what is clear is that the initiatives which were taken by Damiba, like the so-called zone d'intérêt militaire, military areas of interest, or the new brigade, which is meant to work to better control the VDP, les volontaires pour la défense de la patrie, have not shown lots of results. And what is at stake is also the way in which soldiers on the ground will be deployed. For instance, I was mentioning this attack in Gatsingé, Ibrahim Traoré himself mentioned the fact that most of the soldiers who were killed were very young. They only arrived in the military in 2021, so which proves that non-very experienced soldiers are deployed on the ground, which seems to be very problematic, in fact.
This is a familiar story throughout West Africa, Emmanuel Liga, the disconnect between those who are sent out to fight in the field and those that are making the decisions back at HQ.
Yes, I think that is a crucial problem because especially when there's this kind of attack that Niagale just talked about, and there is a huge loss of lives, there is a tendency for people to look for, let's say, probably the scapegoat or the reason why things are not going fine. And in this case, there are soldiers that are on the battlefield. They feel certain options that should have been taken by those in their air-conditioned offices in the capital, including the head of state himself, should have been taken much earlier. And I think from what Ibrahim Traore is indicating to us, they include strategic decisions in terms of expanding the partnership, the strategic partnership with other countries that probably can help more efficiently in combating this insurgency.
And we heard in that report, that clip of the new junta leader, and he said we're open to working with lots of people.
Exactly. So he's been he's diplomatic. He said, well, we are looking at all partnerships, and then we have been working with the United States. Of course, France is a traditional partner there. And the tendency is to say if things are not going fine is because the support by France is not working very well. And then he also said, we are going to look into other partnerships wherever they may come from, including Russia. And he specified that actually Burkina Faso has already been working with Russia. They have Russian equipment. And I don't see any African country actually that hasn't a form of cooperation with Russia. So it's not really a big deal. So I think what is going to happen is how is he going to try to bring in Russia in a way that will not provoke the kind of reaction that came from the Western powers in terms of how they reacted when Mali brought Wagner from Russia to intervene in Mali. And that is what many are speculating is likely going to happen in Burkina Faso, particularly as the head and founder of Wagner just sent his congratulations to Ibrahim Traore and said, well, you did a good job. You pushed that guy out. He wasn't acting fast enough.
We're going to look at that comment by Yevgeny Primogozhov in a moment. Rita Yamouri, this Tuesday in Ouagadougou, we saw this, in quotation marks, welcoming party for that West African ECOWAS delegation, several dozen protesters waving, as Emmanuel Liga was alluding to it, the Russian flag at times outside of the hotel where they were meant to meet with the junta. Your thoughts on first of all, your thoughts on the statement we heard from Captain Traore. What does he mean when he says he's open to working with all?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, to add to what my previous colleagues added, I think it's fair to say that Burkina Faso and the current junta are looking for excuses to justify their coup, and also calling to blame France for the current situation, or at least play part of in the current situation. I think it's important to note that France has not been as involved in Burkina Faso as it has been involved in Mali and Burkina Faso and in other in Mali, Niger, and Chad. So France has intervention in Burkina Faso have been limited to small operations, in addition to a few airstrikes that were actually requested by the Burkina Faso authorities. So their presence is not as significant. I think in the call in the protest, I think the population sees ECOWAS as a partner and as a voice that is influenced by France, especially after the visit of ECOWAS member to Paris yesterday, which doesn't help the cause of France. Calling to work with all partners, I don't think that's an issue. I think, Burkina Faso has been working with Russia before, has been working with the United States, but that's not the issue. I think it's fine when you work with reliable partners. But if Burkina Faso chooses to work, again, just like in Mali and other parts of Africa, to work with mercenaries affiliated with Wagner, who are well known for human rights abuses and violence, rather than actual results and stability. I think that's where the problem is, and that needs to be justified by Traoré to its international partners.
How did you?
If he
How did you
realized-
interpret those statements at the outset? Because was it Traoré reaching out to Russia really in earnest, or simply because it was a time when there was a lot of uncertainty over the weekend? Let's not forget, Colonel Damiba had not yet fled to Togo, kind of a way of making sure he leaves the country.
I think he's repeating other narratives that have been stated by other leaders in the region. I think when he's calling on all partners, I think he's trying to keep that door open of like collaborating with the partners that they choose to work with, even if it's that Russia or the mercenaries of Wagner, and trying to appease the situation with the international partners until he figures out the next steps. I don't know how the international community is going to take that, especially when we talk about France, the US, and then the European Union in general. That remains to be seen.
Now, while ECOWAS is reserving judgment for now, Moscow, as was stated by Emmanuel Iga, quick to applaud, the founder of the Wagner Group mercenaries, Yevgeny Prigozhin, put out a statement as early as Saturday where he, quote, warmly congratulated Captain Traoré, whom he described as, quote, a truly worthy and courageous son of his motherland. Your reaction to that, Ali Traoré?
In the beginning of your journal, we have seen the situation of Ukraine. In this war, Russia is looking for many partners to help him in this situation. So this coup is an opportunity for Russia to put, I will say, his hands in African's relationship with France. We have to know that, and near that, Burkinabés are able to choose the partner rightly from and in concordance with our interests. This is the point to take. We are not working only with France. We are not working only with Russia or with the United States. The position of African youngness is just to work with all the partners we can collaborate in a win-win partnership.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, those demonstrations, we're not seeing French or American flags. We're seeing Burkinabe and Russian flags, just those two countries.
Yes, the Russian flags is just a signal that some citizens, Burkinabe citizens, want to collaborate with Russia. But it is not the interest of Burkina Faso to work with only Russia. That is not possible. You know the geopolitical situation. Burkina Faso and it cannot take the decision to only work with one partner. It is not possible. It is the point of our leaders to take the decision to choose the partners. The citizens have their advice on the situation, but the leaders are the only one who have the choice this kind of relationship, not to citizens.
A lot of reactions on the hashtag F24 debates. Sarkin on Twitter writes from Nigeria, we are just tired of France looting our continent, was his response to what's going on there. The French who've been denying all weekend, look, we're not involved in this. We didn't house Colonel Damiba. Have they lost the information war here? Yagare Bakayoko?
Yes, I think so, because as just mentioned by Rida El Yamouari, the French presence in Burkina Faso was, in fact, rather light compared to what it has been in neighboring Mali. What is important to remember, however, is that France has its special forces headquarters based also in near to Ouagadougou, and this is the reason why some new military leaders have used a rather smart approach, consisting in saying that Damiba had been protected by France and was in fact hiding himself in the special forces base. But in fact, at the end of the day, he declared it was absolutely untrue and that France had nothing to do with that. But it seems that it is thanks to these maneuvers that he has been able to take control of all the military, because this is the reason. That is the reason why the civil society organizations, as well as a part of the population, came because of their anger against France, which shows that it is now a very strong way to mobilize a public mass or a public opinion when saying France is behind what is happening today.
But you heard Ali Traoré there saying, and saying what's also been said by the new junta leader, that they're not severing ties with France. But we've seen what's happened in neighboring Mali. Could Burkina Faso become like Mali, where the authorities sever all ties with the former colonial power?
I don't think they might be such a violent diplomatic relation, in fact. But what is likely to happen is that the new authority will be very cautious, is not showing too much proximity with France. And in fact, it is what is happening everywhere in West Africa. For instance, if you look at Niger, which is a close ally of France, there is today a request by the Niger authorities for France not to have too much communications on what it is doing presently, because they perfectly know that it is definitely not in their own interest to be too much associated to France and its foreign policy.
Do Nigeria and Ghana have the same problem with Britain in 2022?
No. I think, we can be happy that at least some countries don't have this kind of problem.
But why is this happening? Why is what Niagali is describing happening?
She is very right.
But why is it happening?
I think there has been some kind of condescending attitude of the French authorities over the years. And I think this particular regime in place in France, the government in France, is not apparently evaluating the situation with the African youths, particularly in the Francophone countries, very well.
But the French president, Emmanuel Macron, his very first speech when he became president, he went to Ouagadougou. Yes. He spoke to university students in Burkina's capital.
One thing
he knew this was important.
Exactly. That was the beginning. But the Macron we saw later didn't seem to be matching his words with actions. And there's been a very, very, let me say, unsmart management of the relationship with the Malian transition regime. If you saw what happened over the months, and, there was this kind of diplomatic attack from both sides, and it was going crescendo until the French ambassador was expelled. And that was because of the way the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs was practically talking about African leaders, whether they're in Mali or particularly now in Mali, they're talking to them like small children.
How are they supposed to talk when the Malians are inviting in the mercenaries of Wagner who've committed acts of brutality elsewhere on the continent?
Well, some people will say...
It was long before the Russians arrived.
I think
it was long before.
A lot of people probably think the presence of Wagner somehow stabilized Central Africa, for example. And there may have been some issues in terms of bad conduct of Wagner in Central Africa, and that started attracting Mali. And then Mali was posting a lot of information about initial successes with Wagner. So that was actually influencing the African youths very much. Then the other aspect of it is that we are having a situation whereby France, is perceived. It's probably a question of perception, but sometimes perceptions are stronger than realities. There is a perception among African youth that there is an incomplete decolonization by France in Africa. We're talking of these French military bases in Mali. I don't think Great Britain has any military base in Nigeria, or nor in Ghana that I know. And then there is this issue of the French driven CFA franc. This what call it a colonial currency that was imposed on these countries right from the period of independence that France is still controlling, and that the youths feel very strongly about that. And the third part of it is that they see France as playing double standards. You know, they don't have any problem with the military coup in Chad. They don't have problem with initially with Damiba. Everything was like going fine, and then there were less sanctions on Burkina Faso, and then Mali, which went really very tough on France, got all the big sanctions from African Union and the Economic Community of West African States, and many youths in Africa feel that those sanctions were being driven by France from behind the scene.
All right, as was mentioned there by Niagale Bakayoko, France flatly denying any help to the fallen junta leader Damiba. This, which had been making the rounds on social media when there was that standoff between those rival factions of Burkina's military over the weekend.
The West is ready to trample over everything to preserve the neocolonial system that allows it to act like a parasite, to rob the world so as to serve the power of the dollar and tech dictatorship.
All right, that was Russia's president. We'll hear more from him. That was from his speech last Friday. What we want to hear was the spokesperson from the French Foreign Ministry.
It's not up to me to comment on the intentions of the protesters. What we observe is that elsewhere in Africa today, there are worrying deployments of Wagner militias, and we have been able to see on the ground that the effect of these militias lead to abuses of the population. We saw crimes unfold in Mali, in the Central African Republic, in Mozambique, also pillaging of natural resources and zero effectiveness in the fight against terrorism.
Redeliamo, your reaction?
Yeah, let me quickly. So France has been really slow to react to the increased Russian influence in Africa and now in West Africa, in particular, like in Mali and now in Burkina Faso. I think this is a failure of intelligence and diplomatic efforts in Mali and Burkina Faso. They have been seeing this coming, and they have failed to react quickly and effectively and in time to prevent arriving to this situation. The not talking to the Malian government after the arrival of Wagner, it's too late. They should have known this and they should have reacted to it. Sit down with the Malians, now sit down with the Burkinabe government to find a solution, to see like what could we do, how we could work this together prior to the arrival of Wagner Group. Right now, like in Mali, it is a little bit too late. And now in Burkina Faso, I think there is still an opportunity for diplomatic efforts to sit down and talk to the Burkinabe junta right now to find a solution. So of course, I think France has struggled to effectively counter this increased disinformation campaigns by local news channels, local social media, supported by the Russians allegedly. But I think France has lost that campaign of disinformation, and that's why we are seeing people in Ouagadougou, as we have seen in Bamako before, the people protesting against France, burning their flags, as well as then carrying the Russian flag. This doesn't mean that all the public in Burkina Faso and Mali supports Russia's arrival and they're against France, but at least there is this part of the population that is buying into this campaign of disinformation, and therefore France are now paying the price by facing this sentiment increasingly visible and making France in this very unwanted situation to work with their long-term partners. So I think France has failed to counter this in time, and now it's running out of time, and it's going to be really difficult now to go back to where it was before.
Ali Traoré, what should France do under the current situation?
France has to take the time to grasp this opportunity to think about its relationship with African countries. African youth are ready to change the geopolitical position of African countries. If France want to be African countries' friend, France has to choose the win-win cooperation strategy. We cannot have this disparity in our relationships. If you put the like to the economic situation in Africa, how many African countries are growing in Europe? I can say nothing. How many European companies are growing in Africa? We are not able to count them because there are too many on the continent. The relationships are not balanced between France and Africa. This is our point. France has to learn from this situation in Mali and not to repeat the same strategy in other Africa and be able to speak with us like partner, not like colonies. This is the point, according to me.
All right, and we saw a bit of that clip. We can maybe show it again. Last Friday's annexation ceremony for Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine. Again, Vladimir Putin asserting that the collective West, quote, doesn't want us to be free. They want us to be a colony. They want to steal from us.
The West is ready to trample over everything to preserve the neocolonial system that allows it to act like a parasite, to rob the world so as to serve the power of the dollar and tech dictatorship.
It's a little ironic, though, when you're sitting, I'll put it to you, Rida Liamouri, when you're sitting in Paris or you're sitting in Washington like you are, and you're seeing reports of atrocities and what Ukrainians would argue is an imperialist war, Russia trying to annex parts of its country. Yet you had Vladimir Putin talking about the collective West and its neo-colonialism. What's your reaction to that?
I mean, to speak in the West African context, I think that is something that resonated with the part of the populations that continue to see the situation deteriorate, not just security-wise, but also like in terms of economic development, the development of the infrastructure, etc. And then it does remember that came just after the crisis of COVID, the pandemic, so the economic situation was already also deteriorating. In addition, on top of, like, if we speak about the Sahel, the deteriorating security situation. So people, in addition to now the juntas of Mali and Burkina Faso, found that legitimate and as an excuse to dissuade from the responsibility to protect the population and say, look, this is not our problem. It's because France failed to resolve the situation, even if they have been here for almost 10 years. So, of course, this narrative is going to resonate with the population that only continues to see the situation deteriorate. I can't speak to what it is in Ukraine, but from the West African context, that's how people see it. And then the current juntas are just feeding into this narrative that
France has already left Mali, and the situation continues to deteriorate there. Is it still the same?
Well, of course, that because we have to ask also the question when they said that even with France's presence, the situation deteriorated. Well, we also have to ask the question: what about if the France were not there? Remember when they intervened in 2013, it was to prevent the spread of jihadists into southern Mali. Also, the national regional governments they continue to avoid assuming a responsibility because these are armies and countries that lack the resources to counter jihadists in the region. And also, the part of this coups happening is because the armies are divided and they lack the unity that is required to counter the rise of jihadists. It's not because France fell to or because they just made the situation to continue worse. And of course, the situation is going to continue to get worse in Mali, unfortunately. That was expected. We don't know when this will be resolved. And if France also stops helping Burkina Faso, the Burkinabe army, in terms of airstrikes as well as intelligence, we expect the situation to continue to deteriorate. And I think everyone will agree that this is very optimistic from Colonel Traoré to think that they are able to resolve the situation on better than Damiba or even before the current the previous government. So we are expecting this to continue to get worse before we can see any sign of improvement.
In the meantime, there are these geopolitical battles that are taking place on the world stage, and the impact is felt in Africa in other ways. Back in June, Senegal's president went cap in hand to Sochi to ask Russia's president to allow grain exports. That was before that UN deal, UN brokered deal with Ukraine to reopen commercial traffic in the Black Sea. Macky Sall was speaking in his capacity as rotating president of the African Union. You should note that Ukraine's foreign minister in Dakar this Tuesday, Dimitri Kuleba, telling his Senegalese counterpart, Aissata Tall Sall, we will do our best until the last breath to continue exporting Ukrainian grain to Africa and the world for food security. Niagale Bakayoko, your thoughts on this visit by Ukraine's foreign minister to the continent?
This is very interesting because you might remember that a few months ago, President Zelensky made a presentation before African Union, and only 4 head of state, African head of state, attended it. And this, when compared with a very important number of African states, which have decided not to vote to condemn the Russian aggression against Ukraine, or who have decided not to show off, it is a bad signal about how other players, and in particular Ukraine, could gain more trust among African counterparts. What is very important to say is that today Africa, in fact, on the international scene, is regaining lots of importance, in fact, in terms of geopolitics, because in the past 20 years, the African continent has been mostly seen as a continent only of conflict, corruption, bad governance, etc. And the normative approach to the continent was what was the vertebra of the Western policy. But today, we can see that there is a kind of geopolitical revenge, and that is the reason why, as was just said by our colleague in Burkina Faso, all African states are not necessarily embracing only one partners, but are trying to diversify their partnerships, including by relying on states which are competing more broadly on the international scene.
Ali Traoré, when you're in Burkina Faso today, does the war in Ukraine seem far away, or is there a Ukraine factor when you look at things like the price of staple items like food, fuel, fertilizer?
I think in Burkina Faso, the impact of Ukrainian war is few on the part of the food situation, but on the part of petrol, we are just. I can say it is very difficult for Burkina Faso because we haven't petrol, and we have many difficulties to supply. This is the most point for Burkina Faso. But when we are seeing what is happening in Ukraine, it is sad for us because we are peaceful pupils instead of our schools, I know, but we are peaceful pupils, and we want and we are wishing peace in Ukraine, peace between Ukraine and Russia, peace in the world, because this situation is dangerous for us. All these weapons which are being used in Ukraine could be used in the Sahel to put an end to terrorism. This is our point. We are seeing that all the Occidental countries are mobilized for Ukraine, supplying them with weapons that we need too in Africa. I have a call to all these countries: stop the war, supply Africa with these weapons, and we will be able to fight terrorism, and it will be a good thing for all mankind. This is not our point in Burkina Faso.
Emmanuel Iga, what's the cautionary tale with what's happening in Burkina for your native Nigeria?
Well, I think Nigeria is very attentive. It's like the big brother in West Africa, and they should be in the front line.
Hang on, we've just been saying France was the big brother, that the ECOWAS, that the ECOWAS delegation was representing the interests of the French.
Yes, I think there's been a great loss of credibility on part of ECOWAS with the African youths generally, because of the way they've handled many of these crises. I think Nigeria is going to definitely try to get involved in because we have had long experience of military coups too. So we have quite a number of people in Nigeria there who know how to talk to soldiers.
And you're
that have taken power.
suffering some of the same pressures in if you look at the map of West Africa, the same pressures that they're suffering everywhere from Mauritania to Nigeria now, with land pressures, insurgencies,
Yes.
sometimes they're called banditry, and a military that seems overwhelmed.
A military that seems overwhelmed, and and they actually have acknowledged that they are overwhelmed. What is still interesting in Nigeria is that we've had a long past of military coups. But now, the situation we have on ground, look at Burkina Faso, 2 coups taking place within 1 year. And the problem of insecurity in Nigeria is 10 times, 100 times more than what you have in Burkina Faso, if we can compare. But the army in Nigeria is staying put. I think they've bought into the values of maybe democratic change, and they are just like waiting for next year for the Nigerians to decide if things are not going the way they want to carry out elections. And that's one of the things that makes the difference between Nigeria and some of these Francophone countries. You were talking about why are there coups in the former French colonies. I think this is what we should see. All the coups that have taken place recently in Chad, in Mali 2 times, in Burkina Faso 2 times, in Guinea, Conakry, they are all Francophone countries. And some of them are due to, the governance for sure, but particularly the lack of will on some of the leaders there to respect the constitutions and, changing constitution to enable them to come back again to power. So like in Guinea. So in Nigeria, I think they are going to try to carry that message across to Burkina Faso. They are doing that in Mali. The chief negotiator in Mali is Goodluck Jonathan, former president of Nigeria, and they will be talking to the young putschists in Burkina Faso and tell them to pedal softly so that they don't rock the boat of Burkina Faso.
No, I just wanted to add that please do not forget what is happening in Sudan.
Yes.
Which is not a French-speaking country.
There are many other examples that are non-Francophone.
Where, contrary to what is happening today in French-speaking countries, where the military are more or less support from the population, in Sudan, they are shooting dead people who are protesting against the junta, the civilians who are protesting against the junta. So it is very important to mention it as well.
All right, we have much more to talk about, especially with this, the possible domino effect of the insecurity, again, born of those insurgencies in the Sahel. I want to thank you, Niagale Bakayoko. I want to thank as well Emmanuel Iga, Rida Liamour for being with us from Washington. Ali Traoré, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.